Week 5 of the fantasy football season with buys kicking in. He is running back start sit every matchup this week. Christian McCaffrey and the San Francisco 49ers visit the Los Angeles Rams on Thursday Night Football. CMC, he's been back to what he was a couple years ago. And I said even coming into the season, if he's not injured, he's got potential to be the top running back in fantasy football once again. So this week, he's a must start. Kyren Williams a start. Kyren, I know last week it was a down game for him, but the Rams offense had a big game. Overall, they won the matchup as well in that one in a high-scoring game versus the Indianapolis Colts. So Kyren Williams getting the majority of the touches. I know Corum, he's getting 5-10 touches per game, but Kyren's still the guy you want over here in Los Angeles. Blake Corum is like I said, one of the better handcuff running backs in the league. He's getting his 8 to 10 touches per game, but if he's not scoring a touchdown, obviously not enough yards per carry to have value weekly. Minnesota Vikings at the Cleveland Browns. This is a tougher matchup versus stout defense of the Cleveland Browns. Jordan Mason, though, he's looked good in the first few starts. He's been playing for Aaron Jones for this Minnesota Viking team. And this week, even in a tough matchup with the Cleveland Browns, I think Mason still could go out there, 70-80 total yards, and find the end zone. Xavier Scott is it. Last week, he was good in the receiving game with Xavier Scott, where he actually had 6 catches, 43 yards, found the end zone, and 2 carries for 1 yard. But he's not going to guy that's going to be in your lineup weekly. And like I said, they were trailing a lot in that game, so they had to throw. That's why he got more action as a passing downs back. But he's a sick. Quinshon Judkins quickly took over this backfield after off-the-field problems, and he didn't sign his rookie contract and missed majority of the training camp till week 2. But he stepped right in as Quinshon Judkins, and he's going out there and putting up numbers. And this week, even versus a good defense of the Minnesota Vikings, he's a start. Now with Cowboys at the New York Jets, Javonte Williams, he's been one of the best running backs, believe it or not, in fantasy football over the first month of the season. So this week in a great matchup with the New York Jets where their defense can't stop anyone. We saw Achane just go for a big game versus Jet defense. I think Williams once again, and this Cowboy offense continues to roll. He's a start. Breece Hall will start. Brandon Allen, he got hurt on the Monday night game versus the Miami Dolphins. It didn't look good with his knee twisted and his body weight landed on him. So Breece Hall, he had a big game Monday night. He could do it all out of the backfield, in between the tackles, catch the football out of the backfield. And this Cowboy defense, I've said it in a lot of videos, whoever's versing Dallas, pretty much, if they're getting a decent opportunity, you start that player. So Hall must start this week. New York Giants at the New Orleans Saints. Cam Scatterbo, the workload's been great in his first start. 25 carries with Scatterbo in that Week 4 victory versus the Los Angeles Chargers. So he's getting a lot of work, obviously. Devin Singletary isn't a problem in that backfield. And even if Tyrone Tracy returns, I think Scatterbo is going to be the guy over here for the Giants for the rest of the season. Even though Tracy, he might come back next week. Alvin Kamara start. Last week, a decent game it was for Kamara. But Kendre Miller's starting to eat into some of the work here for Alvin Kamara. And Alvin Kamara is obviously a trade target as well, where he might be traded at the NFL trade deadline. When New Orleans is 0-4, they got the youth movement going there where they're going nowhere this season. So Kamara possibly could go to a new team, but this week in a good matchup versus the Giants, he's a start. Kendre Miller, a fringe option the last 2 weeks. He's getting more touches, and last week he had 11 carries for 65 yards versus the Buffalo Bills defense. So Miller, he's always had upside, but always just been something in the way, injuries or off the field things with Kendre Miller. But if he keeps it going and starts getting his touches, he could be a guy, like I said, if Kamara is traded, he'll be the starter there. But for this week, in a good matchup versus the Giants, he's a fringe option. Ashton Jeanty, he's a start in this one. Last week was the coming out party for Ashton Jeanty. 3 touchdowns in that one, 2 of them receiving, which was a good thing to see. And in Indianapolis, I know their defense has been decent this season, but Jeanty, he's getting the full workload. Last week, an encouraging game with the monster game, and he's a start. Jonathan Taylor, he's a must start each and every week. This week, a great matchup, Vegas Raiders, and it's a home game where Taylor, he's been way better at home throughout his career than he's on the road. So this week, a must start. Miami Dolphins at the Panthers. This could be a mini high-scoring game between these two teams. Both these defenses can't stop anyone. And Devon Achane, he's been a top running back once again this season. So last week, Achane, he had a big workload. He had 99 yards on the ground, found the end zone. He didn't do much in the receiving game, surprisingly. But weekly, he's a running back that's going to get you 15-plus fantasy points in PPR leagues. Chuba Hubbard to start last 2 weeks. I know he's failed to reach double-digit fantasy points is Chuba Hubbard. But he's a running back. He's getting a big workload. I know Rico Dotto got some work last week, but that game was out of hand early where they were down 42-10. So I think this week Chuba Hubbard, he goes out there and in a good matchup versus Miami, he's a start. Denver Broncos at the Philadelphia Eagles, J.K. Dobbins a start. First 100-yard rusher under Sean Payton's regime as a Denver Bronco. And J.K. Dobbins, it was slow out of the gate in that ball game last week. They didn't give him a lot of work. And then in that fourth quarter, he pretty got a lot of work where they were up and they were looking to run the clock out versus Cincinnati. So this week, definitely a tougher matchup at the Philadelphia Eagles. But J.K. Dobbins, every week, at least 10 or more fantasy points to begin the season. R.J. Harvey is sit. Last week, he got a lot of work. It was R.J. Harvey, especially catching the football out of the backfield. So this could be a 50-50 split as the year goes on, but I have to see a little bit more out of R.J. Harvey. Even the football out of the backfield and quick in between the tackles is why they took him in the second round of the NFL draft. But this week, one more week, I got to see from Harvey and how this backfield shakes out. He's a sit. Saquon Barkley starts. Barkley still having a good season, but nothing compared to last season where he was off to a monster start. And teams, they're zeroing in on Barkley, obviously. They want Jalen Hurts to throw the football a little bit more. But Barkley weekly at least getting 15 plus fantasy points. And even in a matchup versus a pretty good Bronco defense, he's a start. Texans at the Ravens, it looks like Woody Marks is the guy over there. Marks, he always had the passing role, obviously, for this Houston Texan team. But in between the tackles is a smaller back. You had to see it from Woody Marks. And last week we saw it. He went out there, had a big game. So this week at Baltimore, where it looks like they're going to use him even more, once again, he's a start. Nick Chubb is sit. If he's not scoring a touchdown, he don't have upside. Unfortunately, is Nick Chubb. And he's a running back that's had a lot of major injuries over the last few seasons on and off. So he's a sit. Derrick Henry a start. I know the last 3 weeks underwhelming, underperforming for Derrick Henry. But if Lamar Jackson is out in this ball game, they're going to feed Derrick Henry a whole lot with Cooper Rush, where he's not a game manager, but he's a guy they're not going to take a lot of chances with them. We've seen it with the Cowboys with Cooper Rush. Obviously started a lot of games last season. Justice Hill was hit last week. I know he had the big game, but a 71-yard run in garbage time in the fourth quarter made his day for Justice Hill. But like I said, he's locked in as a third down passing downs role, but not enough volume to have weekly value. Tennessee Titans at the Arizona Cardinals, Tony Pollard to start. The workload's been there week in and week out. I know for the most part he's been a touchdown-dependent running back, and now Tajay Spears possibly could return. But this week in a decent matchup at Arizona, I think Pollard could put up some points. He's a start. Tajay Spears a sit. Like I said, it's a good possibility he returns this week to the lineup. It's Tajay Spears. We know he's a good receiving third down back, and Tennessee's been trailing all season long, 0-4 on the season. But Tajay Spears, I don't think the upside is great as well, because Tony Pollard's going to get, obviously, majority of the touches in between the tackles. And if Spears not doing much catching the football, he really don't have value. Trey Benson a start. Last week, I thought it was an okay outing for him in his start. But now James Conner obviously out for the season for Trey Benson. But Amari DiMercato vultured him where he caught a football for a touchdown out of the backfield. But like I said, Trey Benson, he's going to get a lot of work in between the tackles. DiMercato wasn't a factor in terms of that. He only had 2 carries. So Benson a start versus a bad Tennessee team. And Amari DiMercato, like I said, he scored the touchdown last week, but he only had 4 total touches, and he didn't really see the field till late third, early fourth quarter. So I have to see more out of him before, obviously, he's an option. He's a sit. Tampa Bay Buccaneers at the Seahawks. Bucky Irvin, he's undergoing MRIs and tests to see if he could play in this game. Bucky's been one of the better backs in the first month of the season in fantasy football. So if he gives it a go, he's the start. And obviously, if you don't, Rachaad White is going to step in. And we know White, one of the better receiving backs out of the backfield. I know in between the tackles and yards per carry haven't been good for White over the last couple seasons. But like I said, if he's the guy over there now, he'll be the starter. Where I know Sean Tucker will mix in, but White will get majority of the touches. Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet starts. Kenneth Walker, we know he's going to catch the football out of the backfield, and also in between the tackles, he's going to get his work. And Zach Charbonnet in between the tackles and short goal line yardage is where he's going to get his work. So I think this game could be a high-scoring game at the 12th man in Seattle. And both these running backs in a 50-50 split pretty much carve out fantasy value more weeks than not. Detroit Lions at the Bengals. Jahmyr Gibbs obviously locked in as a start each and every week. He's having another monster season. Once again, he's living up to the bill. David Montgomery, a fringe option. I know 2 weeks ago had the monster game, over 150 yards on the ground and a touchdown. But last week, a nothing ball game it was versus the Browns. But this week, an easier matchup at Cincinnati, where last week Cincinnati gave up over 175 yards rushing to Denver. I think David Montgomery, the ceiling isn't that high, but he's a fringe option. Chase Brown a start. There's no one in that backfield over there. Samaje Perine, he's got a couple touches here and there, but he's not a guy that's going to take value from Chase Brown. And I know the numbers haven't been great from Brown, but at least it was an encouraging sign. He had double-digit fantasy points in PPR leagues last week. So this week in a matchup versus Detroit, where they're going to be trailing, and we know Brown's a good receiver out of the backfield, I still think he's a back-end start option. Commanders at the Chargers, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, Chris Rodriguez, Jeremy McNichols all sits for me in this ball game. The backfield's been a mess over there in terms of fantasy football. Pretty much the touches have been all the same for all these guys, but no one's really standing out and putting up good numbers weekly, so they all sit, especially in a tough matchup at Los Angeles. Hampton to start. Hampton's gone out there in the last 2 weeks, especially since Harris has gone down with injury, and he's getting more touches. He's been an elite running back, is Hampton, with over 20 fantasy points 2 weeks in a row. No one's over there to take work from him, like I said, especially with Harris out for the season. Videla, Haskins, they're not going to get many touches. So this week in a matchup versus a defense that just got torched by Bijan Robinson, he's a must-start. Patriots at the Bills on Sunday night. Ramondre Stevenson, Trevion Henderson, Antonio Gibson all sits. All these running backs pretty much split 50-50 between the three in the blowout victory in Week 4 versus the Carolina Panthers. So Henderson, his day was saved with a touchdown. And Antonio Gibson as well, his day was saved with a goal line touchdown. And Stevenson, he didn't really do much. So this week in a tougher matchup at Buffalo, and it looks like it's a 3-man committee over there in New England. It's not something I'm going to really want to be a part of as a fantasy owner. So there sits James Cook. He's locked in as a start each and every week. A lot of people thought it was fluky last season. We led the league in rushing touchdowns, where obviously Josh Allen runs the football a lot and one of the best quarterbacks in the league, obviously. But James Cook picking up where he left off last season. And this week on prime time, Sunday night, he's a start. Kansas City Chiefs, Jaguars to close it out. Only one Monday night game of the week. Pacheco and Kareem Hunt, fringe options. Upside hasn't been there for these two running backs. And it's a committee as well, 50-50, where Pacheco is going to get short yardage and obviously goal line work like he did last week, where Hunt, he's going to get work in between the tackles, and also he's a receiving back out of the backfield. But like I said, these guys, upside really isn't that high. Their fringe option, and Brashad Smith, he's a sit, but last week he was the best pass catcher out of the backfield for this Chief team, and a former wide receiver in college converting to a running back. So Smith's someone to keep an eye on over the next few weeks, where the work possibly could go up, where Matt Nagy, offensive coordinator, said they got to find ways to get him the ball more. But right now, this week at Jacksonville, he's a sit, but someone to be owned in 12-team leagues or deeper. And now to ETN, he's been one of the best running backs and a surprise this season in fantasy football. And he's really taken to Liam Cohen's, obviously, offense, where we saw Bucky Irvin last season, the big season last year, and the Liam Cohen offense. At ETN, he's a must-start each and every week. I know this game they'll most likely be trailing early and often, but he's putting up numbers regardless of the outcomes of these ball games. And Bashal Tutin is sit. Tutin's getting work as the backup running back, but not enough volume targets to be an option weekly, even in a game where they're going to be trailing. Season sits. That's running back starts at every matchup for Week 5 of the fantasy football season.